Picture a steel tube, 300 feet long, prowling beneath the Pacific Ocean. Inside, 80 men share the same recycled air for weeks. The temperature hovers around 100 degrees. The humidity is suffocating. One depth charge, one mistake, one mechanical failure means a slow death trapped on the ocean floor. This was life aboard American submarines in World War II. They called themselves the Silent Service, and they fought the most effective naval campaign in history. American submarines represented less than 2% of the U.S. Navy, but sank 55% of all Japanese ships destroyed during the war. They strangled Japan's economy, cut off its oil supply, and turned the Pacific into a graveyard for Japanese merchant vessels. This is the story of the war beneath the waves. December 7, 1941. As Japanese planes devastated Pearl Harbor, American submarines represented one of the few forces ready to strike back immediately. The Navy had 51 submarines in the Pacific, and they headed out for war with one critical problem. Their torpedoes didn't work. The Mark 14 torpedo was supposed to be America's secret weapon, a technologically advanced torpedo with a magnetic detonator that would explode beneath enemy ships, breaking their keels. In reality, it was a disaster. Torpedoes ran too deep, passing harmlessly under targets. The magnetic detonators fired prematurely or not at all. Even when torpedoes hit directly, the contact detonator often failed. Submarine commanders watched in frustration as they achieved perfect attack positions, fired torpedoes that should have sunk enemy ships, and saw nothing happen. Commander Dudley Mush Morton attacked a Japanese convoy in January 1943, firing 15 torpedoes at perfect range. Only one exploded. Other commanders reported the same problem: perfect shots, no explosions. Some suspected their own incompetence. The truth was worse. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance had never properly tested the torpedoes and refused to believe submarine commanders' reports. For nearly 2 years, American submarines fought with defective weapons. Commanders developed workarounds, firing more torpedoes, shooting from closer range, aiming for specific ship areas. Some deactivated the magnetic detonator entirely, relying only on contact detonation. It took until late 1943 for the problems to be fully acknowledged and fixed. Despite these handicaps, submarines still scored victories. But imagine how many more Japanese ships could have been sunk if the torpedoes had worked from day one. The defective torpedo scandal remains one of the great failures of American military procurement. Submarine duty was voluntary because it was so dangerous. Yet men volunteered in droves, drawn by extra pay, faster promotion, and better food. Submarines ate like officers, while surface sailors ate standard Navy chow. But they earned that extra pay. A fleet submarine was 311 feet long and 27 feet wide, about the size of a football field, but most of that space was machinery, weapons, and fuel. 80 men lived in the remaining cramped quarters. Hot bunking was common. Men shared beds in rotating shifts. Privacy didn't exist. You ate, slept, and lived inches from your shipmates for 60-day patrols. The environment was brutal. Diesel engines, batteries, and body heat combined to create temperatures over 100 degrees. Humidity was so high that everything stayed perpetually damp. Mold grew on leather, food, and clothing. The air reeked of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, cooking food, and toilet waste. Fresh water was scarce. Showers were rare luxuries, usually limited to a few minutes once a week. Psychological pressure was constant. Surface ships could see the enemy coming. Submarine crews had only their sonar and periscope. They operated blind, surrounded by water pressure that would crush the hull like a tin can if they went too deep. Every creak of metal, every unusual sound could mean discovery and death. Depth charges were the submariner's nightmare. When detected, Japanese destroyers would attack with patterns of explosive charges set to detonate at specific depths. Inside the submarine, the crew could only wait in silence as explosions thundered around them. Lights shattered, equipment broke loose, the hull groaned under pressure. Men waited in darkness, breathing shallow, wondering if the next explosion would rupture the hull and flood the boat. Yet submariners developed intense camaraderie. They depended on each other completely. Every man's competence determined everyone's survival. This created bonds stronger than almost any other military unit. They were the Silent Service, and they took fierce pride in that identity. Japan was an island nation completely dependent on imported resources: oil from the Dutch East Indies, rice from Southeast Asia, rubber, tin, and raw materials from conquered territories. Without merchant ships to transport these resources, Japan's war machine would grind to a halt. American submarines targeted this vulnerability ruthlessly. The campaign started slowly due to the torpedo problems and cautious commanders trained in peacetime doctrine. But by 1943, aggressive young commanders like Richard O'Kane, Dudley Morton, and Samuel Dealey were developing new tactics and racking up impressive kill counts. They hunted in wolf packs, coordinating attacks on convoys. They penetrated defended harbors to sink ships at anchor. They lurked along shipping routes, picking off tankers and freighters. They laid mines in strategic channels. The cumulative effect was devastating. Japanese merchant marine losses mounted relentlessly. By 1944, Japan was losing ships faster than it could replace them. Oil tankers became priority targets. Without oil, Japanese aircraft couldn't fly, ships couldn't sail, and tanks couldn't move. American submarines sank tanker after tanker, slowly choking Japan's military. The statistics tell the story. American submarines sank 1,178 merchant ships totaling 5 million tons, over 60% of all Japanese merchant losses. They also sank 214 warships, including a battleship, 8 carriers, and 11 cruisers. This was the most successful submarine campaign in naval history. The cost to Japan was catastrophic. Factories shut down for lack of raw materials. Civilians starved as rice shipments stopped. The military ran short of fuel, ammunition, and equipment. By 1945, Japan's economy was on the verge of collapse, and submarines deserved much of the credit. Commander Mush Morton summed up the submarine mission simply: sink 'em all. And they came remarkably close to doing exactly that. Success came at a terrible price. Submarine duty was the most dangerous job in the U.S. military. 52 American submarines were lost during the war, 1 in every 5. 3,505 submariners died, the highest casualty rate of any branch of the American military, 22%. When a submarine was lost, usually the entire crew died. There were few survivors, few rescues. You either brought the boat home or you didn't come home at all. Some submarines simply vanished. USS Wahoo, commanded by the legendary Mush Morton, disappeared in October 1943. No distress signal, no survivors, no explanation. Only decades later did researchers discover it had been sunk by Japanese aircraft in shallow water. Morton and his entire crew died. USS Tang, commanded by Richard O'Kane, the most successful submarine commander of the war, was sunk by its own torpedo. During a night surface attack, a torpedo malfunctioned, circled back, and struck Tang. The submarine sank in minutes. O'Kane and 8 others survived to become prisoners of war. 78 men died. USS Grunion was lost with all hands in July 1942 near Alaska. USS Scorpion vanished without trace in 1944. USS Bullhead was sunk by Japanese aircraft just days before Japan surrendered, the last American submarine lost in the war. The causes varied: depth charges, mines, aircraft bombs, mechanical failures, friendly fire, and unknown accidents. What they had in common was finality. When a submarine went down, rescue was nearly impossible. Men either drowned immediately when the hull ruptured or slowly suffocated as oxygen ran out in a damaged submarine lying on the ocean floor. Submariners knew the risks. They volunteered anyway. The extra pay helped, but mostly they believed in the mission and trusted their shipmates. They were volunteers fighting a crucial campaign that was slowly winning the war. The submarine service produced some of World War II's most successful naval commanders. Richard O'Kane commanded USS Tang for 1 year, sinking 24 ships, more than any other submarine commander. His aggressive tactics and brilliant seamanship made him legendary. After Tang was sunk by its own torpedo, he survived brutal conditions as a Japanese POW and returned home to receive the Medal of Honor. Samuel Dealey commanded USS Harder, earning the nickname the Destroyer Killer, for sinking 5 Japanese destroyers in one patrol, an unprecedented achievement. Destroyers were submarine hunters, fast and dangerous. Sinking them required nerves of steel and perfect timing. Dealey and Harder were lost with all hands in August 1944. Eugene Fluckey commanded USS Barb on some of the war's most audacious missions. He penetrated heavily defended harbors, sank ships with rocket attacks, and even landed a shore party in Japan to blow up a train, the only ground combat action on Japanese home islands by American forces. Fluckey survived the war and lived to age 93. Lawson Red Ramage received the Medal of Honor for a surface attack on a Japanese convoy where Barb charged through the formation like a destroyer, firing torpedoes at point-blank range while under heavy fire from multiple directions. It was submarine warfare at its most aggressive and dangerous. These commanders shared certain traits: aggressive tactics, tactical brilliance, and absolute confidence in their crews. They pushed their submarines and crews to the limit, achieving results that seemed impossible. Their success inspired other commanders and set new standards for submarine warfare. The submarine campaign in the Pacific never received the attention given to carrier battles or island invasions. There were no newsreels of submarine attacks, no dramatic photographs of torpedoes hitting targets. The silent service operated, as the name suggests, silently. But their contribution was decisive. While carriers and battleships fought spectacular surface engagements, submarines waged economic warfare that slowly strangled Japan. Every tanker sunk meant less fuel for aircraft. Every freighter destroyed meant fewer supplies for troops. Every transport torpedoed meant reinforcements that never arrived. By 1945, Japan's merchant marine was effectively destroyed. Ships couldn't leave port without being hunted by submarines. Convoys suffered catastrophic losses. The home islands were cut off from their empire. American submarines had accomplished what no surface fleet could have done. They had isolated Japan and made its defeat inevitable. The strategic impact extended beyond sinking ships. Japan was forced to divert destroyers and aircraft to anti-submarine warfare, reducing forces available for offensive operations. Merchant ship crews became increasingly reluctant to sail, knowing the odds of survival were poor. The psychological impact of submarine warfare demoralized Japan's maritime industry. General Douglas MacArthur, hardly known for praising the Navy, acknowledged submarines' contribution. "I have a high regard for the submarine service. In my judgment, the submarine was one of the weapons of the war that sank the most tonnage." The submarine campaign in the Pacific established principles of submarine warfare that remain relevant today. American submarines proved that undersea forces could decisively influence wars by targeting economic assets, not just military vessels. The lessons learned influenced Cold War submarine doctrine. Nuclear submarines carrying ballistic missiles became America's ultimate deterrent. Attack submarines continued the silent service tradition, patrolling unseen beneath the oceans. The submariners of World War II paid an enormous price for their success. 1 in 5 never came home. They fought in terrible conditions, facing dangers most people couldn't imagine. They sank nearly 6 million tons of Japanese shipping and helped win the Pacific War. They called themselves the Silent Service, and they remained silent about their achievements. No parades, little recognition, few headlines. Just the knowledge that they had done their duty under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Their war was fought in steel tubes beneath the waves, in heat and darkness, facing death by drowning, suffocation, or crushing pressure. They fought silently, effectively, and courageously, and they deserve to be remembered as some of World War II's greatest heroes. Imagine a 4-engine bomber bristling with machine guns, carrying thousands of pounds of bombs, flying at 25,000 feet into enemy territory surrounded by hundreds of enemy fighters. This machine could take devastating damage, engines shot out, fuselage riddled with holes, crew members killed, and still bring its surviving crew home. Americans called it the Flying Fortress. The B-17 became the symbol of American air power over Europe, while its bigger, more advanced cousin, the B-29 Superfortress, brought the war to Japan's doorstep and ultimately dropped the atomic bombs that ended the war. These weren't just aircraft. They were technological marvels that represented American industrial might and changed warfare forever. The B-17 Flying Fortress was born in the 1930s when most military planners thought bombers were a waste of money. Boeing designed it as a defensive weapon, a long-range bomber that could protect American coasts from naval invasion. When the prototype first flew in 1935, it was revolutionary. 4 engines when most bombers had 2. All-metal construction. Defensive armament that seemed excessive at the time. A journalist covering the maiden flight saw all those machine gun positions and called it a flying fortress. The name stuck, but the B-17 almost died before it could prove itself. The prototype crashed during testing, killing the crew. The Army nearly canceled the entire program. Boeing was on the verge of bankruptcy. Only the intervention of a few visionary officers who saw the bomber's potential kept the program alive. When World War II broke out in Europe in 1939, the B-17 was still relatively unknown. The British tried using early models for daylight bombing raids and suffered catastrophic losses. The aircraft seemed too vulnerable, its defensive armament inadequate against determined fighter attacks. Then Pearl Harbor changed everything. America needed bombers, and fast. Boeing ramped up production at a scale never before attempted. The B-17 evolved through multiple versions, B-17E, F, and finally the G model, each adding more armor, more guns, and more capability. By 1943, B-17s were rolling off assembly lines at an incredible rate. Not just Boeing facilities, but Douglas and Lockheed plants too. At peak production, a new B-17 was completed every hour. Over 12,000 would eventually be built, a testament to American industrial capacity. The 8th Air Force, based in England, developed a controversial strategy: daylight precision bombing. The theory was that B-17s flying in tight formations could defend themselves with massed firepower while accurately hitting specific targets: factories, rail yards, oil refineries. The reality was far more brutal. Each B-17 carried a crew of 10: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners. They were packed into an unpressurized, unheated aluminum tube, flying at 25,000 feet, where temperatures dropped to 50 below zero. They wore electrically heated suits that often malfunctioned. Frostbite was common. So was hypoxia, if oxygen systems failed. And then there were the fighters and flak. German fighters attacked in waves, coming head-on at closing speeds of 500 miles per hour. They targeted engines and cockpits. B-17S had 13.50 caliber machine guns by the G model, but coordinated fighter attacks could overwhelm defenses. Bombers fell from the sky in flames, or broke apart in midair, or spiraled down with dead engines. Flak, anti-aircraft artillery, was arguably worse. At specific altitudes over targets, the sky erupted in black explosions. Shrapnel ripped through aluminum skin, killing crew members, damaging systems, and setting fuel tanks ablaze. Pilots had to fly straight and level during bomb runs, making them perfect targets. The tension was unbearable, sitting there, unable to maneuver, waiting for a shell to find you. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid in August 1943 showed the terrible cost. 376 bombers attacked ball-bearing factories deep in Germany. 60 were shot down, 16% losses. Another 100 were damaged. Over 600 men were killed or captured. The losses were unsustainable, but the B-17 earned its reputation for toughness. There are legendary stories. Memphis Belle, completing 25 missions when average survival was 15. A B-17 that collided with a German fighter and flew home with the fighter's tail embedded in its wing. Another that lost its nose section but still landed safely. The crews who flew these missions were heroes in the truest sense. They knew the odds. The 8th Air Force suffered 26,000 killed, more than the entire Marine Corps in the Pacific. Yet they climbed back into those bombers mission after mission, knowing each one might be their last. While the B-17 fought over Europe, Boeing was developing something even more ambitious: the B-29 Superfortress. The B-29 wasn't just an improved bomber, it was a generational leap. Pressurized cabins so crews could fly at high altitude in relative comfort. Remote-controlled gun turrets operated by computerized fire control systems. Massive bomb capacity, range to strike Japan from distant island bases. It was also incredibly complex and expensive. Each B-29 cost $639,000, the equivalent of over $10 million today. The Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb cost $3 billion. The B-29 program cost even more. Development was plagued with problems. The engines overheated constantly, sometimes catching fire in flight. The fire control system was revolutionary but temperamental. The pressurization system leaked. Early models had so many issues that crews called them flying coffins. General Curtis LeMay, taking command of B-29 operations in early 1945, made a radical decision. He stripped out most defensive armament, loaded the planes with incendiary bombs, and sent them over Japanese cities at night at low altitude. This violated every principle of strategic bombing, but it worked. The firebombing campaign was devastatingly effective and morally controversial. The March 9 to 10, 1945 raid on Tokyo killed more people than either atomic bomb would. Somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 civilians burned to death in a single night. B-29s turned Japanese cities into infernos, destroying industrial capacity and breaking civilian morale. By August 1945, B-29s had burned most major Japanese cities. When the decision came to use atomic bombs, only 2 B-29s were capable of carrying them, specially modified aircraft that had trained for months for this specific mission. August 6, 1945. A B-29 named Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from Tinian Island carrying a single bomb nicknamed Little Boy. The mission was unlike any bomber mission in history: one plane, one bomb, one target. At 8:15 a.m., Bombardier Tom Farabee released the bomb over Hiroshima. The crew had 43 seconds to escape before detonation. Tibbets threw the B-29 into a violent diving turn to get as far away as possible. Even at 11 miles distance, the shockwave hit the plane like a physical blow. When they looked back, a mushroom cloud was rising over where a city had been. 80,000 people were dead or dying. The crew flew home in silence, processing what they had done. 3 days later, another B-29 named Boxcar dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. This mission nearly ended in disaster. Fuel transfer problems, weather issues, and confusion over the secondary target almost forced them to ditch in the ocean. But they completed the mission, killing another 40,000 people and ending World War II. The B-29s that dropped atomic bombs were the ultimate expression of strategic bombing theory, a single aircraft delivering such devastating force that it could change the course of a war. But they also raised questions that we're still grappling with today about the morality and limits of air power. The B-17 and B-29 represented quantum leaps in aviation technology, but their impact went far beyond military applications. The B-29's pressurized cabin technology directly led to modern commercial aviation. The Boeing 707, America's first successful jet airliner, used lessons learned from the Superfortress. The entire commercial aviation industry traces its lineage through these wartime bombers. Remote-controlled weapon systems, computerized fire control, long-range navigation, all technologies pioneered on the B-29 became standard in post-war military and civilian applications. The management techniques developed to manufacture these complex aircraft at scale revolutionized American industry. The strategic bombing doctrine developed around these aircraft shaped American military thinking for decades. The idea that air power alone could win wars, that precision strikes could destroy an enemy's will to fight, these concepts dominated Cold War strategy and continue to influence military planning today. But there's also a darker legacy. Strategic bombing of civilian targets, normalized during World War II, led to increasing moral ambiguity about warfare. The B-17 and B-29 crews believed they were attacking military and industrial targets. The reality was that thousands of civilians died in these raids. The atomic missions took this to its logical, terrible conclusion. We talk about these aircraft as technological marvels, which they were, but we shouldn't forget the human beings who flew them and died in them. B-17 crews faced some of the war's highest casualty rates. Young men, most barely old enough to drink, climbed into these bombers knowing they had maybe a 50-50 chance of completing their required 25 missions. They watched friends' planes explode or spiral down in flames. They came home from missions with dead crew members still in the aircraft. The psychological toll was immense. Bomber crews suffered PTSD at rates comparable to ground infantry, but they had to keep flying mission after mission. Some broke down, some refused to fly. Most just kept going day after day because their buddies were counting on them. B-29 crews in the Pacific faced different challenges. Mechanical failures over vast stretches of ocean meant certain death. The firebombing missions, while strategically effective, left moral scars. Some crew members struggled for years with guilt over the civilian deaths they caused. The men of Enola Gay and Boxcar particularly carried a heavy burden. They had ended the war, saved countless lives by preventing an invasion of Japan, but they had also killed over 100,000 people in 2 missions. Some defended their actions for the rest of their lives, others were haunted by them.